Hi, welcome to the Code Dispenser channel. I'm Paul, and for those new to the channel, I've been working with Microsoft Technologies since the mid-1990s and started using C# in 2003. Today's video is just a quick brief regarding web accessibility and disabling buttons. In my previous video we built an offline indicator and an associated service that any page or component could use to check for an active network connection. We will use that project to discuss issues with disabling buttons, as some may have wondered why I did not set the disabled attribute on the button to the inverse of the inline service property value, opting instead to leave the button enabled, just skipping the count increment when offline. Whilst creating that video, I was in two minds as to whether or not I should have discussed this topic in that video, but opted against it to try and keep things short, and to discuss the use of disabled and ARIA disabled in a separate, shorter video. I can tell you from experience, when you really start looking into accessibility topics and wanting to learn the best practices for various issues, you may find yourself going down a rather large rabbit hole, as there are just too many conflicting sources of information and differences in how assistive technologies handle various states, such that a simple disabled state can become quite a headache. Before we begin, I can say one thing: most seem to agree that keeping buttons enabled is a lot more accessible than having them disabled. Let's see why that is and what we can do. As a recap, let's look at the code on this counter page. All we did was to add a little bit of code to check that our indicator service and event was working correctly. We did this by showing a message and not allowing the counter to increment when offline, both checking the property on the service and registering with the service to receive an event. For those who have not watched that Blazor build, we also added a property on our component to hold the text that screen readers should announce when the network status changed between on or offline states. Let's see the code in action. I tend to use NVDA when adding and checking accessibility features. NVDA has a couple of modes, as I believe most screen readers do, such as a focus mode for when dealing with forms and data input, and a browse mode for when reading normal page content. Although you can manually change modes, screen readers can and do detect input fields and then change automatically. With NVDA, when you change modes, you hear a typewriter sound for focus mode and a single beep for browse mode. In focus mode, users will generally use the tab key to navigate between fields and the arrow keys when inside text fields. The arrow keys when in focus mode do nothing without intervention. In browse mode, you can use the arrow keys to read text, which also reads some of the text values assigned to buttons and ARIA attributes, but this may be different to what is read when navigated to directly with the tab key, as is the case with NVDA. For example, NVDA only seems to read the ARIA described by attribute value when in focus mode. Other screen readers may differ. Why is any of this relevant? Let's turn on NVDA and listen to what it sees. We will switch between modes and observe the effects. Although the counter page only has a single button on it, this page could have contained a form with fields and a cancel button, a submit button. The end result would be exactly the same. Think of our counter button as being the submit button. I will now turn on the NVDA screen reader.
Main landmark counter heading level 1.
Let's get in focus mode. OK, we got the keyboard sound, so we are in focus mode. I can tell you that the arrow keys are doing nothing, as I am trying. I will use the tab key as well as the shift and tab keys instead.
Click me button. Toolbar, view site information menu button secure. Counter document, main landmark, document, click me button. Counter heading level 1.
Now let's switch to browse mode and use the arrow keys.
Current count, 0. Button click me. Current count, 0. Heading level 1 counter.
Let's turn off the network connection. I will turn speech on and off to negate lots of messages while we change things. You may hear a keyboard sound or a beep as NVDA auto changes mode when it detects input fields.
Filter edit has autocomplete multi-line filter.
Keyboard sound. NVDA has automatically changed to focus mode.
DevTools is docked to right. List. Disabled grouping. Disabled. No you are offline. Throttling combo box presets. Offline collapsed. Speech mode on demand. Speech mode off.
I heard a beep, so we are now back in browse mode. Just hope we don't lose track of what mode we're in. Let's navigate the page.
Speech mode beeps. Speech mode talk. Current count, 0. The button does not increment the counter when offline. Button click me. The button does not increment the counter when offline. Current count, 0. Heading level 1 counter.
NVDA read everything. It read the message, it read the button text. I pressed enter, but nothing happened. Not too bad, as I was told the button would not do anything when offline, and I was alerted to the fact that we were offline moments ago, but maybe there is some room for improvement. What about in focus mode? Let's listen.
Click me button. Toolbar, view site information menu button secure. Counter document, main landmark, document, click me button.
Now let's change the code to disable the button, as a lot of developers would do. Why let users press the button when offline, or with validation errors? Seems like a sensible thing to do to me. I have done this off camera, along with adding some other code. Let's take a quick look at the code, and then view the page again. I added a string variable called disabled, as just using a bool doesn't work for the data disabled attribute that I added, or for the area disabled attribute. I tend to use a data disabled attribute instead of adding and removing CSS classes, but that's just a personal preference. It's not any sort of best practice that I'm aware of. I also added a style tag directly in the HTML code, so we could see all the code together. I amended the user message slightly and moved it to be below the button. I also added an area described by attribute, which references this user message via the ID of the paragraph tag. Crucially, I disabled the button based on the network connection status. Let's see what happens.
Speech mode talk.
We are in focus mode, so let's navigate the page with the tab key.
Blazor builds link, navigation land, counter, weather link, main landmark, about link. Navigate, counter, home link, Blazor, DevTools document, network panel property page, application.
We've left the page. Where did the button go? I'm sure there was a button on this page.
Counter document, main landmark, document, counter heading level 1.
Let's now switch to browse mode and navigate with the arrow keys.
Current count, 0. Button unavailable, click me. Does not increment the counter when offline. Button unavailable, click me. Current count, 0. Heading level 1 counter.
It sees a button and says it's unavailable, and then reads the message in red below the button. Let's remove the disabled attribute from the button and try again. Let's try browse mode.
Current count, 0. Button unavailable, click me. Does not increment the counter when offline. Button unavailable, click me. Current count, 0.
It read the page content as before. Now let's switch to focus mode and use the tab key.
Click me button unavailable does not increment the counter when offline. Toolbar, view site information menu button secure. Counter document, main landmark, document, click me button unavailable does not increment the counter when offline.
The button now receives the focus as normal, and the screen reader announces that it is unavailable, along with the reason via the area described by attribute, which just references the on-screen user message. I hope you can agree that having the button enabled and using a couple of area attributes makes the page a lot more user-friendly, and something you should think about before simply disabling a button. Some of you may be thinking, well, that wasn't too bad. What was all that nonsense with the rabbit hole for? If anybody remembers coding a site to work nicely in both IE6 and Netscape, accessibility issues and assistive software at times are on par. I would like to think that we now have something reasonably accessible, but as I am not an expert in this field, I do not know how accessible it is. I am sure that there is a lot more that could be done, but I strongly believe this is a step in the right direction. One last point, just to reiterate, NVDA doesn't read the area described by attribute when in browser mode, so it only reads the text once. Other screen readers may read the text twice. One way to solve this, which is questionable but is promoted by a prominent accessibility website, is by using the area hidden attribute on the paragraph element. By rights, the area hidden attribute should hide the text from screen readers, so linking it to an element that is hidden is counterintuitive. NVDA links the area described by attribute to an element with the area hidden, and it works fine. I have no idea about other screen readers, hence a reference to the days of Microsoft versus Netscape. I hope you enjoyed this Blazor brief, or at least it gave you food for thought. Until next time, bye for now.